Starting us off at number 10 is The Afterlife Cul-de-sac. So what is the only show on Cartoon Network set in a cul-de-sac? Ed, Edd and Eddy. Double D was my favorite, let me just put it out there. He deserved more lines and appreciation, I'm just saying. Anyway, this theory is actually wild. It claims the kids who lived in the cul-de-sac are actually all dead, and the neighborhood is some kind of afterlife / purgatory. Since all the kids are different ages, they all died between 1900 and 2000, but because they all died in the cul-de-sac, they all stayed there. Think about it, the show has no other kids, no parents, just the kids we see, and even they are a bit weird. I mean, they all look a bit sickly, they all have blue tongues, which like hello, corpse tongues. Okay, say if we had to analyze the kids, Rolf is farm obsessed and tends to his animals, so he probably died in the early 1900s. Ed and Sarah were from the 50s because Sarah is controlling as hell and Ed is a dumbass who simply thrives on comics, which were very popular at the time. Naz is a 60s or 70s child, obviously she's carefree, a bit of a flirt, you get the gist. And Kevin was a 90s kid because he's a bully, he rides his bike as an escape, and his dad was most likely controlling and abusive, which is why in the afterlife he imagines his dad showering him with a lot of gifts. Now I'm not saying this is a foolproof theory, but I'm also not saying that.
At number 9 we have Princess Bubblegum is evil. Princess Bubblegum has always been a representative of one of the heroines of the show and seems to have the mind of logic that sets everything in the right direction. However, she is often up to something a little shady. In one particular episode, she develops a serum that turns everyone in the Candy Kingdom into a zombie, and if it wasn't for Finn and Jake, the whole place would have ended up a wasteland. She also created Lemongrab, who has his own problems to deal with, but is still a sentient creature. It seems that Bubblegum will push her boundaries with science no matter what the cost is. She risks people's lives and even creates life, even if that life has a horrible existence. She also sees herself as much smarter than everyone else, which she kind of is, but her hubris could lead to some experiments that would risk everyone's life. Again. At number 8 we have It's All a Game. There are several elements of this show that seem very close to the world of a role-playing game. There are monsters, demons, fights, treasures, friendships, NCPs, quests, loots, power-ups, and 2 companions who stick together throughout all of it. There has been some speculation that the whole thing is actually a father and son playing a tabletop role-playing game together, Jake being the father and Finn being the son. Other characters come in quite often like Marceline and Princess Bubblegum, and they can be friends of the family or family members themselves. They aren't there as often as the 2 main characters because if you have ever tried to get a group together for D&D, the scheduling is the hardest part. But this would explain how Finn and Jake go on adventures without each other and sometimes side characters, because those characters come in and then they play just when one person isn't there. You guys can figure out what I'm trying to say. At number 7 we have Marceline will become like her father. Marceline is the vampire queen and definitely one of the most badass characters in the show. She cares little about what people think about her and has a wide range of powers that have even left Finn and Jake running away at times. But she comes from a world of dark and downright evil. Her dad is a massive demon that is nearly unstoppable and has an insatiable appetite for souls. Actually, I heard that souls are quite slimming and I understand why he would want to eat them. But what if his evil demeanor isn't something that was taught to him, but it is hereditary, and it is only a matter of time before Marceline is consumed by her dark genetic code. She becomes the queen of darkness, and then it's up to Finn and Jake to take down one of their best friends. That would be a twisted, dark fate. At number 6 we have the Lich still resides in Finn. The Lich King and Finn have had a back and forth battle for a long time, with the Lich even finding his way to work his demonic presence into Finn's mind, with the 2 sharing such a deep connection, and with the Lich already showing that he has the ability to connect to Finn's soul. Maybe the battle between the 2 isn't over. What if the Lich is waiting for himself and Finn to get stronger, and then when Finn is the greatest hero around, he will use his power to take control of the Adventure Time lead and maybe even the whole planet. At number 5 we have Susan and Finn are related. One of the struggles that Finn is constantly faced with in the show is the fact that he's the last human. It must be weird to be outnumbered by people who are made entirely of candy. Not a bad thing, it would just get a little lonely, I think. Well, there was an introduction of Susan. She was an extremely strong and agile character who wore a cat hat and looked a lot like Finn. She lived with fish people, and for a while it was thought that she too was one of these fish people, but until it was revealed that she was actually human like Finn. Some people speculate that these last standing humans could be related, and even Susan could be Finn's mother. Some evidence that backs this theory up is the reason that Susan lives with the fish people is because she and Finn were separated while out at sea, and then that is where Finn gets his deep dark fear of the ocean from. This would be an extra nugget of the show, and also very interesting and also depressing. Being separated from your mom, that is very sad. At number 4 we have real nuclear war. Throughout the show there's the reference to the Great Mushroom War, which seems to have been a massive nuclear war that basically destroyed everything that was the former Earth. All of the history and everything that people once knew was completely wiped out except for a few zombies that were left behind walking around seen in certain episodes. Well, some people think that the land of Ooo is actually a parallel version of Earth, a world where the Cold War didn't stay so cold and someone fired nukes off and then got nukes in return, which led to a wasteland, and you know the rest of the story. It's an interesting viewpoint on the show, and it makes it a little easier to connect to the characters. I feel closer to them thinking that they once lived in a world that's just like ours. At number 3 we have Princess Bubblegum is from the Mushroom War. How old is Princess Bubblegum? Well, no one really knows the answer, but we can be sure that she is very, very old. We know that she has been around forever, has barely aged, and some very old characters like the Ice King and Marceline have known Princess Bubblegum for a very long time. There have been theories passed around that PB was once a human like you and me, but some experiments along with exposure to radiation led her to being transformed into the gum-like genius that we all know and love. It would kinda make sense. See, she is a genius, and she might have found a way to make sure she would survive the nuclear fallout from the Cold War heating up by turning herself into a gum lady. This could have been the only way she could make sure her body would have been survived getting blasted by radiation. At number 2 we have The Marvelous Misadventures of Flapjack Cross Adventure Time Deluxe. I just put deluxe in there for fun. This theory is actually just regular sized. But this is one of my favorite theories because I love both of these shows. The Marvelous Misadventures of Flapjack and Adventure Time might be in the same world and happening at the same time. Here are some points that are a little hard to ignore. The creator of Adventure Time, Pendleton Ward, was one of the head writers on Flapjack. And think about how crazy the world of Adventure Time is. It's not a stretch to believe that across the ocean will be a nautical themed city that built itself up after the events of the Great Mushroom War. Flapjack and Knuckles are constantly looking for Candy Island, which might have been the famed Candy Kingdom. And the reason that Finn has never gone on an adventure to find Flapjack and Knuckles is because he is so afraid of water. It's the crossover that we so desperately need. And for the number 1 spot we have Finn's arm comes from the multiverse. Throughout the show we see Finn's arm go through some pretty wild changes. He has a mechanical arm at one point, then the grass arm, and of course the classic organic. But in one episode we see an alternate reality of Finn where this version of Finn seems to have a robot arm. Could this be because each version of Finn has some sort of change to their arm because that's just how the multiverse works? Or is it that Finn's arm is the key to getting into other dimensions? We have seen his arm act as a sword many times. We've also seen the sword act as a tool to control the gate to the 4th dimension, if even only for a moment. So maybe the two things are linked. The show has constantly addressed the idea that there are multiple dimensions, and maybe Finn is a higher being from one of these dimensions, or maybe it's not. None of this is true and we should just ignore everything I just said.
Starting us off with number 10 is Johnny the Kid Part 1. I actually watched a lot of Johnny Bravo, mostly because it was usually on around the time I came back from school, and after a stressful day thinking boys had cooties at school, I came back and watched a cartoon about a guy hitting on girls constantly. Great logic, amen. Johnny Bravo was a smooth talking Elvis impersonator, I feel. I mean, he never said he was Elvis, but he just acted like him. Although he looks like a muscly good looking guy on the outside, this theory suggests he's actually just an annoying kid. I mean, think about it, he never ever gets any of the girls he hits on, but that could be because of his approach, but humor me. His best friend is an 8-year-old, which is just strange for a grown man, and he even calls a lot of the girls he wants mama. I know that could be the whole Elvis reference, or it could be the fact he's a child and that's just how he speaks to older women. What do you guys think? Coming in at number 9 are the post-apocalyptic Flintstones Part 1. Again, one of my favorite shows. I even saw the old live action remake and loved it. Have yet to go as Betty for Halloween, but soon come, I promise. Anyway, based off the show, you'd assume Bedrock was situated in the Stone Age. I mean, why wouldn't you? They're called the Flintstones, they live in Bedrock, this is basically Stone Age propaganda. Either way, this theory claims they actually live in a post-apocalyptic society. Now think about it, the show is basically based on the modern West. They reference technology, religion, culture all the time. Stone Age people didn't have any of that. The theory theory goes on to say after many nuclear disasters, the entirety of Western civilization collapsed, and so the generations after them recovered just enough to create a society based on what they remembered. At number 8, we have the post-apocalyptic Flintstones Part 2. I love when the theories are so juicy they need a part 2. I'm just sat there like, yes girl, yes! Anyways, this sub-theory features the crossover we all died for, the Jetsons meet the Flintstones. I wanted to be in the Jetsons so bad. When I watched it when I was young, I literally thought by now, like by 2019, we'd be living in a world like that, yet we still even have like flying cars or houses. This is shocking. Well, I've been fed lies. This is a betrayal. Either way, moving swiftly on before I get further triggered. The theory goes on to say the Flintstones and the Jetsons actually lived in the same world at the same time. In this post-apocalyptic society they live in, we became so divided that one group live in a super advanced society, whereas another group is barely hanging on the edges of technology. All the talking animals living with the Flintstones are synthetic creations. I mean, all the real animals have been extinct for 5 ever, and no one acknowledges how stupid it is for them to talk to things that didn't even exist with early humans. But you know, that's none of my business. Filling our number 7 slot is Scooby-Dooby Depression. I literally bought all the extra Scooby-Doo long episode movie things as a kid, and I can't tell you how many times I've watched both live action movies. That is my shit. But either way, from their slang, all the flowers on the mystery machine, even the gang's clothing, you can tell the show was set in the 60s. And the theory claims that it was set during one of the worst economic depressions ever. And if you think about it long enough, it actually makes a lot of sense. I mean, in the show, everything is either falling apart or abandoned. Hotels are empty, theme parks are ruined, every villain they catch is actually someone who would normally be respected, you know, like a teacher or a scientist or a historian, but they've just fallen on hard times and have just turned to petty crime in this dark period of life. And no, I definitely didn't forget about the gang. You'd think they were just hippies out looking for adventure, but really they're like in their late teens, early 20s, not interested in getting proper jobs. They move around all the time because there are no jobs available no matter where they go. They wear the same clothes every day. Do they shower? No one really knows for sure. Do they pay for petrol? I don't know. In conclusion, they're unemployed hobos that accept petrol and food for helping those around them. Knife in my heart, dagger in my chest. Now at number 6 is the Rugrats affair. Now this was a cute show, I'm not gonna lie. It wasn't my favorite because I thought I was just too grown up for that baby stuff, but it did the job. According to this theory, which I'm sure many of you have heard before, most of the babies on the show aren't real apparently. They're all figments of Angelica's imagination since she actually has no friends. That sounded really savage, I didn't mean it like that. Angelica, you're a lovely girl. She makes up these friends to make up for the fact her parents are too busy working to make time for her. Angelica bases all her friends on the dead children of her parents' friends. I don't know how believable that bit was, but we carry on anyway. Tommy was stillborn, which explains why Stu is always in the basement making toys. Chucky died with his mum, which explains why Chaz is a nervous wreck 24/7. And Phil and Lil were actually aborted or their parents suffered a miscarriage. So because Angelica didn't know the baby's gender, she just created twins. What do you guys think? Viable or Coming in at number 5 is Courage the Cowardly Delusion. Now this was my least favorite show on the channel and I never wanted to watch it. Who makes a kids show that creepy and dark? I don't get it. Courage was definitely its own niche, and this theory claims Courage was actually Cerberus the Hellhound. Think about it, his only goal in every episode is to protect Muriel and Eustace and the house in the middle of nowhere. Their house is legit in the middle of a barren hellhole, so Courage, aka Cerberus, always stays in hell, which is nowhere, to protect mankind, aka Muriel, from the underworld, which is characterized by all the villains he meets. LeQuack representing greed, Cats representing hate, and etc. And if you're wondering where that leaves Eustace, he's Hades and he rules over and hates everything in hell. And honestly, I can totally see this theory being true. You guys, I wouldn't even bat an eyelid, I wouldn't even be surprised. At number 4 is Inspector Gadget versus Inspector Gadget. I only remember watching this show while having breakfast and getting ready for primary school in the morning. Like, I don't recall it ever being on in the evening. Is that just me? Let me know. Either way, Inspector Gadget was always up against his arch nemesis, Dr. Claw, but we never got to see his face. It's like Miss Bellum in the Powerpuff Girls, like that fat. I know she's gonna be hot, just show me her. Sorry, got sidetracked, but you know, when she's slim thick, she's slim thick, you know? Either way, this theory claims there's a very specific reason we never get to see Dr. Claw, because he is the original Inspector Gadget. Gasp. The original Inspector Gadget was actually a cop who died on the job, but he was the police force's best guy and they couldn't bear to part with him. So they built a robot that acted and looked exactly like him, but there was one problem. The guy never actually died, he survived, and when he saw that he was replaced with a robot, he became bitter and turned into the notorious Dr. Claw. I mean, it explains why they're never in the same place at the same time, so you never know. Filling our number 3 slot is Samurai Utonium. I can proudly say I think I've seen nearly all the Powerpuff Girls episodes, and thankfully I tried to avoid Samurai Jack as much as possible, but I heard they rebooted it a few years ago, hope that's good. But can we just acknowledge the fact that Jack is literally Professor Utonium but with a man bun and a katana? Like, this theory claims that Jack and Professor Utonium are the same person, and that during his final showdown with Aku, Jack and him are launched into a time portal that Aku himself created. By using all his dark power, Aku gets turned into a liquid version of himself, which translates to Chemical X in a new world and time period that Jack, aka Professor Utonium, now lives in. Jack/Utonium dedicates his life to studying Chemical X and eventually makes good use of Aku by creating the girls. So he was evil, but the girls combat that, so it just really comes full circle, doesn't it? Now at number 2 is Foster's Home for Imaginary Blank Part 1. I absolutely loved Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. It was so cute and funny and refreshing, and all the little imaginary friends were just little gems. Either way, the premise of the show is that kids have imaginary friends that everyone can see, and we all just kind of coexist. When kids outgrow their imaginary friends, they give them to Foster's Home, created by Madam Foster. It gives the imaginary friends shelter and the option to get adopted by new kids. Now, Madam Foster runs the house with her granddaughter Frankie and her own imaginary friend Mr. Harriman. This theory argues that Madam Foster isn't real. She died due to old age, and Frankie was heartbroken and just couldn't get over the loss. So she probably imagined Madam Foster so no one would find out at the home because she was so dearly loved. I mean, this honestly explains why Madam Foster is always so childlike and energetic despite being ancient. It also ties in with why Frankie just can't move on from her life at Foster's because the home is actually hers. Finally, at number 1 is Foster's Home for Imaginary Blank Part 2. The juiciness of the theory continues, but the twist here is that Frankie is actually the imaginary friend, not Madam Foster. The other side of this theory argues Frankie is just a younger version of Madam Foster. They're even wearing the same thing. Madam Foster imagined up Frankie because if it was up to her, she would have been a lot younger when managing the home, but she's just too old for it now. Think about it, Frankie never has imaginary friends of her own, she doesn't even want one. She acts human, but she's most likely not. And it also explains why she's so happy staying at the home looking after everyone instead of going to college or something, for example. Both are completely plausible. Who do you think is imaginary, Madam Foster or Frankie?
At number 10 we have Everything is a Dream. The entire land of Ooo is a very strange place mixed with some of the weirdest characters I've ever seen. Some seem like they're pulled right out of mythology and others are ridiculously original. The whole show is really a fantasy world like none other, but what if it's all just that? What if the whole world takes place in the fantasy of Finn's mind? It could be that the world is all dreamt up and it's something that he just imagines every night when he goes to sleep, or the real thing could be that Finn is in a coma, a young boy who had an accident and now is forever stuck in a dream state. A wonderful dream state, that is, filled with friends and wild adventures, but it would really be sad to think about everything that's going on in the outside world. There would be a young boy slowly withering away while in a coma, and his parents struggle every day with the thought of whether or not they should pull the plug or give their son another chance at life. Oh my god, that is depressing just talking about it.
Coming in at number 9 is Johnny the Kid Part 2. Continuing on with Johnny Boy, an alternate theory explores the fact the women he hits on usually hit him or inflict some kind of physical pain when rejecting him, which could be, screwed up if he was a little kid. But if we just take a look at his behavior and look at the fact he exaggerates about so much, like the man can't even identify a single flaw in himself. In every episode he literally compliments himself 5 times in the first 2 minutes, or 2 seconds, really it's either or. So he could easily just take the pain he feels from the rejections and externalize it into physical pain. Honestly, I'm not totally convinced by this theory. I get how someone could come up with it, but I feel like he genuinely wants these girls to a point it would be very abnormal for a kid. Like, that is his sole mission in every episode, and surely 8-year-old guys aren't that obsessed with getting girls at that age. Please? hopefully. God knows what's going on these days. At number 8 we have Lucien. I had a love-hate relationship with the Cramp twins. Like, I initially hated the show, but then the more I watched it, the more I realized I really freaking liked it, so I was like, they got me. Anyway, this theory claims that Lucien's life is tragic. I mean, isn't all of ours? The whole show takes place in his head as he goes through foster care. Wayne, his twin brother, was actually stillborn, which is why he's blue and has red around his eyes. His mom Dorothy died a few days after giving birth to Lucien, hence she's yellow, and his dad Horace got so depressed after the death of Wayne and Dorothy that he hung himself, and hence he's green. After everyone basically dies except Lucien, he gets put into the foster system, and the family he ends up with neglects him quite a bit and doesn't give him any attention. Unhappy with his life, as anyone would be, he starts to imagine what it would be like to have a family that loved him, and that's the show really. His friends play along with his delusions because they are riddled with guilt over his situation. Childhood ruined. Filling our number 7 slot is Coma 10, and whether you choose to admit it or not, Ben 10 was lit. I feel like every episode was so action-packed and interesting, and the tension between Gwen and Kevin was also fab. I loved it, I was here for it, and it was surprisingly easy to remember all the aliens Ben would turn into, even though there were like 10 of them. Either way, this theory takes us back to the first ever episode. In it, Max, Ben, and Gwen are camping, and Ben takes a walk seeing a shooting star on his way. He wishes on it, hoping he won't have a boring summer, and the star starts heading straight for him. He dodges out of the way, and the shooting star ends up being the capsule that had the Omnitrix in it. But what if he didn't dodge it? What if he just tripped on something as he was wishing on the star and he fell unconscious? Think about it. Max and Gwen don't even go looking for him straight away. If that huge thing crashed into the forest, they would have. If Ben just tripped, then they wouldn't have even known that happened, so they wouldn't have looked for him. So everything in the show is happening in Ben's head while he's in a coma. He's a fan of comics and video games, and the aliens he becomes resembles actual heroes. Like, Heat Blast is kind of like Iron Man, even his mask looks similar. And obviously if Ben wanted not a boring summer, that means he finds Max and Gwen boring, so in his coma state, Max becomes one of the plumbers, and nerdy Gwen becomes a magical martial arts expert. That doesn't even sound like a half bad coma. Although I don't wish to be in a coma, I'm just saying I wouldn't mind being Ben 10 if I was in a coma. Eamon 10. There's just no ring to that. Sorry. Now at number 6 is the Scooby Draft. I truly believe Scooby-Doo will go down as one of the best cartoons in cartoon history, like hands down. An unpopular opinion, but Scooby himself was my least favorite character, and I'm not even afraid to admit that. Come for me. Anyway, this theory explores the fact we never get told why a group of teenagers and a dog are traveling around the country in a van. The producers were probably like, don't worry about it, no one's even gonna care, and then everyone's like, what's happening? Either way, this theory claims because the show premiered in 1969 and the Vietnam War was at its peak at that time, that the gang was actually driving to Canada to avoid being drafted. Everyone's just coming to Canada these days, I love it. Oh, Canada. The theory goes on to say Fred was drafted, but since he had all the mystery solving skills and zero combative skills, he knew he'd most likely die on the field, so he decided to run away with his fiancée Daphne. Since Velma is an activist for the war to stop, she went along with them, and Shaggy is clearly a hippie who's not going to war anytime soon, so he joined the gang as well. Coming in at number 5 are Tommy's and Jerry's. If anyone has anything bad to say about Tom and Jerry, then get out right now, because you need to put some respect on that show, because it paved so many people's childhoods. Like, I won't hear it. I won't hear it. This theory is crazy but interesting, so here it goes. Apparently Tom and Jerry was Nazi propaganda. Hear me out, hear me out. Let's start with the names Tom and Jerry. Way back when, British soldiers were referred to as Tommies and German soldiers were called Jerrys. Tom is always the bad guy, and in every episode he does his level best to kill Jerry any way he can. But Jerry fools him every time, either by blowing him up with some dynamite or running back into his hole. I don't know. The show aired in 1940, the same year as the Battle of Britain, so the theory claims the show is just a coded message about superior German intelligence. What do we think about that? At number 4 is a series of Unfortunate Chicken. You have to love me for these names, I'm pretty proud of myself. Either way, Cow and Chicken in my opinion was one of the most annoying shows on the channel. That was the first show on when I got home from school, and I was always just waiting for it to be over. Having said that, maybe I misjudged the whole thing. According to this fan theory from Redditor AJ of Stewart, Cow and Chicken was dark. Firstly, they're the only animals in the show. Everyone else is human, including their parents, but they're not. The duo get up to the most screwed up things that most parents would punish them for, but their parents seem oddly cool about everything. If anything, Chicken could kill someone and his dad would still be super proud of him. The theory claims the whole show takes place in Chicken's mind, since in reality, he's the bastard son of a broken home. Not to be confused with Jon Snow, because that's a different show. His dad puts him down all the time and emotionally abuses him, which is why in his head, his dad always just goes on about how proud of him he is. Cow is Chicken's sister, and in real life she's a slightly airheaded, emotionally needy, overweight girl, all because of growing up in the same toxic household as Chicken. So in his head, she's this helpless cow. He knows he's choosing to escape his reality rather than face it, which is why in his head he made himself a chicken. At least he's fully aware. Lastly, the weird devil character is every third-party adult he meets, like a divorce lawyer, his principal, the repo man, etc. And all in all, this hasn't made me like the show anymore. So sorry not sorry. Sucks to suck. Filling our number 3 slot are The Grim Adventures Part 1. The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy was an interesting show for kids. I don't know whose idea it was to base a whole cartoon off the thing that represents death, but sure, we'll go with it. This series is similar to Ed, Edd and Eddy in the sense it assumes everyone living in Ennsville is dead, but that's the only similarity, I promise. The entire town is dead, and Billy's family is the most recently deceased family since they just moved there. Hence, they're also the most disturbed by everything going on around them. Grim reminds everyone that they're still awaiting judgment and to remind them of their sins. When he does go and collect souls, he's not killing them, he's actually escorting them to either God or Satan. In the episode Keeper of the Reaper, Billy's family is just about to move out of Ennsville, and so Mandy and him start arguing over who's gonna keep Grim, like he's some pet or something. This is the Grim Reaper, guys, he's not your goldfish. When really, the argument is actually which side does Grim serve? Is it hell, which Mandy represents with her harshness and cruelty, or is it heaven, which Billy represents with his innocence? In the end, the fact Billy doesn't leave means Grim serves both heaven and hell, but hell has more dominance over him, and we can see that because Mandy is the one that always tells Grim what to do. I think that's a banging theory, to be fair. Everything pretty much checks out. That's a yes from me. Now at number 2 are The Grim Adventures Part 2. This one is long-winded, so pay attention, guys. In the episode Who Killed Who, Mandy meets an elderly woman called Miss Doolin who tells Mandy she beat Grim in a staring contest once. After they diss Billy a bunch, Mandy leaves the house and realizes Miss Doolin was a ghost and that Grim had known her for a while but had come to reap her soul. It's like Miss Doolin knew Grim her whole life and constantly beat death. Does that remind you of anyone? Mandy. Mandy wins over Grim in every episode in arguments and things, and even look at the pendant Miss Doolin is wearing. It's a spider, and in the show we know Mandy quite likes spiders. At the very start of the show, Mandy could have easily beat Grim in a staring contest, but she actually beat him in limbo. Miss Doolin is old and could have easily confused the limbo competition with the staring contest. So with all that explanation, the actual theory is that Mandy could be an old woman now who's remembering her childhood in the form of Miss Doolin. Instead of remembering humans, she remembers monsters because she's schizophrenic. As the show goes on, it just gets weirder and weirder, and that reflects Mandy slowly losing her mind. When she does finally die, that's when she realizes Grim won for once. I'm saying for once, like he even has to win more than once. Once you're dead, you're dead. And finally, at number 1 is The Tragedy Next Door. Codename Kids Next Door was so fun. I loved the missions they'd go on, and I'd pair up which ones had crushes on each other. Like number 4 and 3 were definitely a ting, you can't convince me otherwise. Either way, this theory is morbid. Dubbed as the hospital theory, this one says that all the kids were patients at a local hospital, and a nurse told them that they were all a squad of secret agents to make them feel better. Number 5's parents were divorced, and her dad left them poor. Her mum blamed the whole thing on her and beat her, hence she ended up in the hospital, and also why she's kind of like a mother figure to the group since she wants to be a better one than her own mum. And number 4 came from a rough neighborhood and got mugged by a man and didn't back off, so the dude ended up stabbing him, hence he's in the hospital. Number 3's family were all drug addicts and would abuse her. This is just not getting any lighter, I'm sorry. So one day she took her mum's antidepressants, but the next day her dad shot her mum, and she walked in on it and felt nothing because of the pills heavily affecting her. Her dad then shot her to leave no witnesses, but she survived and ended up at the hospital. Number 2 surprisingly actually had a pretty good loving upbringing. His parents really let his creativity flourish, but his uncle was jealous of him since his own abilities had never been encouraged, so he decides to overstuff him. Even when he says no, he forcefully feeds him, and so he ends up in the hospital because of obesity and the chance of heart failure. Number 1's dad had Alzheimer's, but he didn't mind taking care of him. He's the only adult Number 1 actually liked, but after his mum disappeared, all the doctors and nurses just weren't looking after his dad. One day when he took him to the hospital, Number 1 puked and he found out he had cancer, and so he started hating adults after feeling like he was being tortured with chemo and whatnot. And so this squad of kids just went around just hating adults in the hospital ward.